The Canadian Grand Prix successfully concluded last weekend at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. The wet weather conditions that prevailed in the region helped to produce some thrilling moments since the free practice sessions. Throughout the race weekend, a considerable decline was observed from Ferrari after their dominant performance in Monaco 2 weeks prior. Mercedes was the real surprise of the weekend, as they became an unexpected threat to the drivers of the top teams like Red Bull and McLaren. In the end, it was a close contest between Verstappen, Mercedes drivers, and McLaren drivers for the victory of the Canadian GP. Welcome back to Total F1. This is our Canadian GP race report. But before we proceed, hit the subscribe button and smash the bell icon for more exciting updates. As predicted in our pre-race analysis, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve received heavy rainfall before the commencement of FP1, and the extremely wet nature of the circuit obstructed the drivers from bringing their challengers into it. Lewis Hamilton was the first to accept that challenge and brought his car to the circuit 23 minutes after starting the session. Zhou Guanyu red flagged the session after clipping the barriers at turn number 4. Anyway, he was lucky not to experience any severe damage. Drivers were using all of their wet driving skills and experience to keep their cars running throughout the session without experiencing any damage. But most of the drivers went off the road as it was hard to deal with the slippery nature of the track. Valtteri Bottas experienced a big spin, but there was sufficient space to keep his car away from a collision with a barrier or rival car. Alpine decided to give the opportunity to Jack Doohan in FP1, as they're looking for a strong replacement option for Esteban Ocon's seat, which is going to be vacant at the end of this season. Lando Norris was the fastest driver of the session, with a lap time of 1 minute 24.435 seconds, and he was followed by 2 Ferrari drivers. At the start of FP2, the track was relatively dry and was not labelled as wet by the race control. As rainfall was expected within a brief time interval, drivers were trying to take the maximum out of the dry nature of the circuit. But Kevin Magnussen was the first driver in the session to go off the road. Since then, a number of drivers followed his footsteps, as the grip conditions of the circuit were not up to the expected level. When there were 20 minutes to conclude the session, rain arrived in the circuit, allowing the drivers to do some laps on slick tyres as well. Alonso was the fastest driver of the session, with a lap time of 1 minute 15.810 seconds, and his teammate was the third fastest driver in FP2. These 2 Aston Martin drivers sandwiched George Russell in the second spot in the timesheets. Relative to FP2, FP3 can be rated as a full dry session, as water was removed from the track's surface to a considerable extent, improving the grip conditions of the circuit. However, Zhou Guanyu experienced a big spin at turn 2 and ended up at the barrier, damaging his rear. Alexander Albon was lucky to keep his FW46 away from the Wall of Champions by a narrow margin in FP2, but this time his luck was gone and he clipped the wall at the exit of the final chicane. Max Verstappen was the other driver to give a tap to the Wall of Champions after misjudging the circuit conditions. Despite the dry nature of the circuit, a number of drivers went off the circuit after failing to adjust to the grip levels of the newly resurfaced Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. As usual, groundhogs started invading the circuit, and Daniel Ricciardo avoided such a close encounter. Lewis Hamilton was the fastest driver of the session, beating Verstappen by 0.374 seconds. Both George Russell and Lance Stroll closely followed the Dutchman in the timesheets. At the start of Q1, Sergio Perez was observed at the bottom of the timesheets after being uncomfortable with adjusting to the grip conditions of the circuit. He improved his lap time up to the 12th fastest at a certain moment of the session, and once again dropped to the elimination zone when the rival drivers also improved their lap times. In back-to-back race weekends, he was eliminated at the end of Q1. This is going to hurt the championship standings of the Red Bull team in the near future. Perez was eliminated alongside with Bottas, Ocon, Hülkenberg and Zhou. It wasn't a comfortable qualifying session for Verstappen either, as he had to fight to keep himself away from the elimination zone of Q2. Most notably, both the Ferrari drivers were eliminated at the end of Q2 after failing to set some better lap times. However, both the Mercedes drivers appeared to be much more comfortable with the performance of the W15 after their latest upgrade. Leclerc and Sainz were only the 11th and 12th fastest drivers of Q2, and they were followed by Sargent, Magnussen, and Gasly, trapped inside the elimination zone. It was never an easy task for Verstappen to clinch the pole like in previous seasons, as the pace of the RB20 was closely challenged by the performance of the McLaren and Mercedes cars during this qualifying session. In Q3, most of the drivers preferred to go with used tyres to experience more grip. George Russell was able to top the timesheets by setting a lap time of 1 minute and 12.000 seconds, and it was matched by Verstappen in his final attempt of Q3. This was an extraordinary scenario, and this is only the second time such a scenario has happened in Formula 1 history. The pole position went to George Russell, as he was the first to set the lap time. That means that the front row of the starting grid was locked by Russell and Verstappen. They were followed by the two McLaren drivers Norris and Piastri. Daniel Ricciardo was able to reserve the 5th spot of the starting grid by beating the lap time set by two former champions Alonso and Hamilton. Tsunoda was the 8th fastest, and he was followed by Stroll and Albon. On the wet surface of Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, all the other cars except Haas decided to start on inters. The two Haas drivers gambled by going with a full wet tyre setup. The pole sitter George Russell got a good start and was comfortably leading the race when the pack reached turn 1. Daniel Ricciardo was really good in qualifying and was able to start the race as 5th on the starting grid, but he wasn't able to get the maximum use out of that opportunity after losing the track positions to Alonso and Hamilton at the race start. Further, he was handed over a 5-second time penalty for a false start. Meanwhile, in the back of the pack, a collision happened between Perez and Gasly when Gasly tried to complete an overtake against the Red Bull driver at a place where there was no sufficient space available. However, both were lucky to continue their race without experiencing much damage. Kevin Magnussen's decision to start with full wet tyres paid off within the first lap when he was able to push his car into the 8th spot from 14th on the grid. Later he was able to overtake Ricciardo, Hamilton and Alonso into the 5th spot, demonstrating an unbelievable performance. When the race reached lap 3, Magnussen passed Piastri into the 4th spot at the hairpin. Then he came close to Norris after delivering a series of fast laps till the track surface turned in favour of the intermediate tyres. When he lost his performances with wet tyres, Magnussen decided to switch to inters on lap 8. The Haas crew wasn't fully prepared for that pit stop, and it cost around 8.6 seconds, dropping him again to the 14th spot where he started the race. When the race progressed up to lap number 10, Russell was just 1 second clear of Verstappen, who was running at 2nd place. McLaren drivers occupied the 3rd and 4th spot at that moment and maintained a gap of 7 seconds with the race leader. So Verstappen was in a better position to put pressure on the race leader, but he lost that advantage when he ran long at turn 1, briefly going across the grass, and created the opportunity for Norris to reduce the gap with him. When the track lost its wet nature on lap 20, Norris completed a successful overtake against Verstappen with the assistance of DRS. At that moment, the gap between Russell and Norris was just 2 seconds, and the McLaren driver tried to overtake Russell in the subsequent lap by repeating his move against Verstappen. On lap 25, Logan Sargent spun his Williams Challenger, and the race control had to call for a safety car session as he couldn't restart it. At that moment, clouds were gathering over the circuit for the next rainstorm, and it opened the opportunity for drivers to pit their cars. Drivers like Verstappen, Russell and Piastri, who were occupying the top spot of the pack, entered the pit lane instantly to take the maximum advantage of this opportunity. However, Norris stayed away from the pit lane and decided to change his tyres 1 lap later. but he made a strategically poor decision, and that resulted to drop him below both Verstappen and Russell. At the race restart on lap 30, Verstappen was in the lead, and Russell, Norris and Piastri stayed behind him. Hamilton was able to improve his track position up to 5th by getting ahead of Alonso during the pit cycle. Rain arrived on the circuit immediately after restarting, turning it to a wet state once again. Meanwhile, the winner of the last race in Monaco, Charles Leclerc, had to give up on his race due to a power unit failure on lap 40. Norris went straight at a corner on lap 42, and that resulted in dropping him behind Russell once again. The second pit cycle was started by Hamilton, switching to slicks on lap 44. Then drivers like Piastri, Russell and Verstappen also entered the pit lane to take their new slick tyres. However, Norris once again followed a different strategy by staying on the old rubber for 2 more laps. He got new tyres on lap 47 and rejoined the track side by side with Verstappen. But he had to give up on that battle with the Red Bull driver as his tyre temperatures were not up to the required level. Then 2 laps later, he locked up and ran wider at the hairpin, opening the opportunity for Russell to complete an easy overtake into the second spot. But 2 laps later, Lando Norris was successful in completing a brave pass. A safety car session was once again introduced when Carlos Sainz spun, collecting Alexander Albon's Williams car as well. Before this collision, Sergio Perez also crashed into a wall, heavily damaging the back of his car. Using this opportunity, both the Mercedes drivers switched to a fresher set of mediums in order to take a pace advantage in the latter part of the race. The race was resumed on lap 59. Verstappen was able to get a jump start, developing a 2-second gap with Lando Norris, who was running in second. The top 2 were closely followed by drivers like Piastri, Russell and Hamilton. Russell started attacking Piastri with the aim of finishing the race as a podium finisher. However, it didn't work as planned, and he had to give up on the chase after losing his 4th spot to his teammate Lewis Hamilton as well. When there were 6 laps to go, Hamilton unleashed his full potential by completing a successful overtake against Piastri with the assistance of DRS. Piastri was further attacked by Russell, pushing him further down the order. However, it was not the end of the hunt for George Russell, as he overtook Hamilton into the 3rd spot within the next few laps. So, Max Verstappen crossed the line as the winner, maintaining a gap of 3.8 seconds over Norris, who crossed the line as second. However, his teammate completed the race as 5th after losing 2 track positions. Meanwhile, Russell and Hamilton occupied the 3rd and 4th spot of the race, behind the top 5. Alonso and Stroll crossed the line as 6th and 7th respectively, collecting some important points towards the championship standings of the Aston Martin team. In the latter part of the race, there was a tense battle between the VCARB and Alpine drivers for the last point-offering spots of the race. However, Tsunoda crashed out of the points at turn 9 in the closing stages of the race, and a number of cars narrowly avoided the Japanese driver's car, saving themselves from a huge crash. At the end of all these dramas, Ricciardo crossed the line as 8th, and the 2 Alpine drivers Gasly and Ocon finished the race behind them. In overall, Ferrari wasn't able to live up to the expectations in Canada, as people expected more from them after their dominant performance in Monaco. But in Montreal, both the cars failed to at least complete the race, after struggling with some kind of issue in their power unit since the beginning of the weekend. The other most disappointing performance was from Sergio Perez, as he experienced his 2nd retirement in a row. Once again, he caused heavy damage to his RB20, which is not financially good news for the Austrian racing team. The next race is scheduled to be held at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya in Spain, and it will surely be an interesting race with a similar level of performance between top teams. What do you think about the current performance of the Mercedes team? Will they be able to find their old form again? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel to get more exciting Formula 1 news. We'll see you in the next video, guys. Goodbye.